in whoever runs the election. For as long as, regardless of the arguments we make, for as long as we don't get it, trust and confidence in the team that runs the election and the proposed process of running the upcoming election, we will still have a problem. We just like it or not, we will still have a problem.
Yet you're laying blame this morning on Jubilee's failure to appear on time. And of course we heard the reasons by the DP. You know, we're still running a government at the same time. Look, we showed up but a few minutes late. But the substantive issue that was raised by NASA principals was also a document that they had not seen, they had not had time to peruse over, etc. Have you had time to look at the document, and what concerns do you have on it? The document, I know that the NASA leadership is looking through it. But in spite of that document, NASA has put on the table what is the minimum requirements. There's minimum changes that have to be made for there to be a credible process. Because the process that was presided over by individuals who have been actually indicted by the Supreme Court as a sham process, not in accordance with the law and the Constitution, you cannot have again the same individuals without any consequence, without anything happening, that we just assume that nothing happened, and the same individuals again preside over this process. So this raft of minimum conditions that NASA has put on the table, including exclusion of those individuals from participating in the management of the upcoming elections, and a whole of other things, including, for example, who prints the ballot papers. NASA had complained prior, and it was told no. I mean, there's an agreement between IEBC and Al Ghurair, and in spite of the problems of that agreement, which had previously even been annulled by a court of law, which had been contested by IEBC, insisted, and look what we ended up, the kind of documents we ended up with. And that's just one of the things NASA is saying, look, we cannot go the same way and then expect different results. At the very minimum, let us begin with a sense of trust from all stakeholders, trust and confidence in who is running the election and how the elections are being run. And as a nation, we should stop seeing this election as a box to tick. It's not a box to tick. The problem that we encountered at the stealing of this election is symptomatic of the larger political problem we have in the country. So it's not just check a list. It's
not just checking like, okay, we've had an election, tick, we have had a kicking democracy. No. We have a lot more underlying issues that need to be dealt with, which is what led to people being so hungry for retaining power that they have to go to that extent in terms of what happened at the last election. All right, Sandra, what do you think?
I will go a few days or a few weeks back, and the events that we've been seeing, what's been occurring at the IEBC specifically, and my appeal, especially to Chebukati, will be that he needs to take charge of his house. He needs to take charge of the processes that are going on within the IEBC. And from my perspective, even the meeting that they held, for me it was a really belated meeting. It's something that they were supposed to do way earlier, where they have immediately after the Supreme Court had given its ruling, they go converge and discuss the issues that they'd like to discuss and come out speaking in one voice. And so for me, I think moving forward, Chebukati has a bigger role to play in this, because the more he takes a backseat, the more he appears to be being led by other forces, is creating a space where the activities of the IEBC are going to be run by outside factors, and that is not what we are expected, or rather what is expected of an independent institution. And so moving forward, some of the things that I believe should take place is that political parties especially should give space to the IEBC to do its work, so that the demands that we are seeing, as much as they are going to be put on the table, they should have a basis upon which we are going to say there's good faith. We are dealing with NAS on one side, we are dealing with Jubilee on the other side. There are issues that came out from the Supreme Court ruling that must be the basis upon which some of the changes that we want to see in the IEBC are placed upon. And so moving forward, it is my hope that both political parties are going to give each other, are going to give the IEBC in particular space to do its work without threats, without ultimatums, without to various conditions that perhaps they might not be able to meet with this point. One, as a show of faith that they're indeed ready for the elections and they are looking forward to moving past this stage so that Kenyans can move on with their lives, so to speak. And then secondly, on the basis that beyond the October 17th election, we are still going to have other processes. We have 2022, we have a number of by-elections that need to be covered. And so the IEBC must remain intact. The IEBC must be seen as an institution that is able to give people free and fair elections moving forward.
And you know, NASA has been clear about the bare minimums, as Simeha has said. So in your opinion, as a governance expert, what are the bare minimums that you believe, again, you've talked about what is possible within the time frame we have, that needs to happen for IEBC to restore confidence?
Well, borrowing from what the Supreme Court said, and of course that one also brings out another issue, the fact that we are yet to see the full ruling, and of course that is now leaving space for everyone to speculate and to go an extra mile as to make demands on what is available or what should be done. And that is why I said initially that even the demands that are being made currently by NASA or by other parties subject to the election should be based on something. And so for me, the bare minimums in this case will be, one, to ensure that the issues that we saw in the past election as regard the returning officers, you have incidences like in Mombasa within the Coast region, for example, where you had a number of returning officers who weren't able to execute their duties as they were allowed. And of course this has opened speculation as to whether there were conspiracies, so to speak, to ensure that the election did not take place as it was meant to. And so moving forward, IEBC again needs to take the center stage in this and ensure that all those issues that were raised or that speculated to have been raised within the Supreme Court ruling, they are addressing it. And it is not left to political parties to more or less dictate the process, or for other groups like what we saw yesterday with the civil society groups. They're the ones agitating for certain changes. The IEBC should be able to preempt this and change this within themselves, address these issues within their spaces to ensure that moving forward we have systems and structures that serve the people like they should.
And do you agree, Joseph, that it appears that, I mean, definitely you would agree that political parties are important stakeholders, but really the driver of the process must be IEBC. They must be ahead of what politicians want.
Well, that is the kind of IEBC we deserve, and we ought to have had. An IEBC that has proactive leadership, that when it sees a problem, it recognizes, it has the ability to recognize it as a problem and acknowledge that this is a problem. It is a problem to this nation, not one political formation or the other, not one political competitor or the other, to the nation, and begin to solve, to institute a process of solving that problem. But unfortunately, we just don't seem to have the competence within IEBC or the will. They could be competent, but just the will to engage in a proactive manner to ensure that, you know, every time, whenever they notice that there's a problem, a reform process is carried out so that we get the best. The nation keeps getting the best. They remind me of one individual in this country who once said that Kenya is fatigued with reforms. And I said, a society that ever gets fatigued with reforms is a dead society. An institution, a leadership of an institution should all the time actually troubleshoot. Just all the time keep troubleshooting and finding out, are we okay, could we do better? And the moment you realize there's space for us to do better, you move the bar so that we go higher. And that unfortunately is not what the kind of IEBC we have just now.
Are we past the point where they can be the leaders of such talks in a process? Do parties have to fill that gap, civil society and other actors? Well,
unfortunately, that is what's happening, and it's not necessarily wrong. We are part of this society. We are all part of this society, even media. When you notice that there's a gap, you come in and fill that gap. You push. You make your contribution to reforming society. So IEBC could lead, but if and when it's not leading, and even if when it's leading, other stakeholders have every right to make their voices heard in the desired reform processes.
And yet there's a fear that the process may then be hijacked by vested interests.
Well, here the things that are being talked about in terms, at least from NASA, in terms of what needs to be reformed, are not secret. They are put out there in public that this is what we are saying we would like. Let anybody point out any of them, whether it's unconstitutional, illegal, or unethical, or whether it pushes a vested interest. All these things are in the interest of the nation. The nation deserves a credible election. And the nation deserves a credible IEBC. So these things, again, are not just for the upcoming election, if and when it happens. These things are for posterity, that let's fix up our institution. Let's begin to inject a new organizational culture in IEBC. You cannot have, as my colleague here says, you cannot have, for example, just one tiny example, returning officers who are indicted for, gross violations of the law, in my opinion, irregularities and illegalities. And then you say, that's the people you start with. That those are the people that you initiate discussion with. Are you available? Come again and manage this election at your constituencies and your counties. How on earth, if you really are thinking straight, how on earth would you begin from that point? You must begin from the point that anyone who was indicted, who is culpable, where there is evidence that from their stations or from their constituencies or from their counties that there were irregularities, cannot and must not be anywhere near this election. Kenya does not deserve those kind of people to manage an election. There are many other things they could be sent to do. They could go back to whatever they were doing. But look at IEBC. That's where it's beginning, that let's call the returning officers and let's begin to engage them.
Right. Sandra, let's talk about special interest groups and their contribution. Joseph has said, look, we're all part of Kenya, so we have a voice. But how do you safeguard then democracy in itself and good governance from being hijacked from special interest groups?
Sorry, which special interest groups in particular?
That would be civil society or even political actors, any other.
Again, it still boils down to having strong institutions, and goes back to having a strong IBC with a strong leadership moving forward. But then again, as we talk about accountability, even by the political parties and even by the civil society or within the civil society group.
I'm sorry, Sandra, we're just cutting you short because the pictures adjacent to you, which you can see is a press by the Kenya National Union of Nurses. We've been waiting on this. Let's listen in and then we'll return to our talk.
Cadre of the health sector. This is in tandem that we have appealed the report, the preliminary report. We appealed against it, and they have delayed to issue a report. We make reference to the above subject matter, our suspended strike, more specifically the